Sometimes the smallest touch is not an act of service. It is the last chance to save a king. Before dawn painted the towers of Blackstone Castle with pale golden light. The royal dressing chamber was already alive with quiet movement. Servants carried polished armor from one stand to another. Tailors made the final adjustments to ceremonial cloaks. Royal attendants prepared silver clasps engraved with the crest of the White Wolf pack. Every detail had to be perfect. Today, Alpha King Alexander Hayes would step onto the grand balcony to announce a historic alliance before thousands gathered inside the castle square. The entire kingdom expected celebration. No one expected betrayal. Near the back of the chamber worked a young maid whom almost no noble could name. Emily Carter moved silently between wooden wardrobes, carefully brushing dust from richly embroidered cloaks before hanging them in perfect order. She never hurried. She believed hurried hands missed important things. Most servants considered her strange. Emily simply smiled and continued working. Since childhood, she had learned that every object carried a story. A loose thread, a worn buckle, fresh mud on polished boots. They all meant something if someone cared enough to notice. Her father had taught her that long before illness took him away. He had spent his life helping construct hidden corridors, watchtowers, and stone passageways beneath Blackstone Castle. As a little girl, Emily often followed him through unfinished halls carrying baskets filled with iron nails and wooden pegs. Whenever she asked how he remembered every tunnel, he always answered the same way. Stone remembers every footstep. She never forgot those words. The chamber doors suddenly opened. Every servant immediately lowered their heads. Alpha King Alexander Hayes entered surrounded by members of his royal council. Tall, broad-shouldered, his polished black ceremonial armor reflected the morning light pouring through stained-glass windows. A heavy midnight blue cloak rested across one arm, waiting to be fastened before the ceremony. Despite the crowded room, the king's expression remained calm, confident, almost unreadable. Beside him walked Beta Nathan Cole, the king's most trusted advisor, the man responsible for organizing today's public appearance. Nathan greeted officers with practiced confidence as servants hurried to complete their final preparations. Emily reached for the ceremonial cloak hanging beside her. As always, her task was simple. Brush away any dust. Straighten the collar. Fasten the silver clasp. Nothing more. She carefully lifted the heavy fabric. The ritual felt unusually cold beneath her fingertips. While smoothing the collar, something caught her eye. A single black thread. Thin, almost invisible against the dark blue cloth. It hadn't come from the cloak. Royal tailors never used black stitching on ceremonial garments. Emily gently removed the thread. It felt coarse, different, almost like the heavy rope fibers used around the old maintenance tunnels beneath the western wall. Her heartbeat slowed. She looked toward Nathan without raising her head. His polished boots appeared spotless, at least from a distance. As he stepped closer to speak with one of the captains, a small patch of dried gray clay became visible along the edge of his right heel. Emily's fingers tightened around the loose thread. Gray clay. Not brown. Not black. Gray. There was only one place near Blackstone Castle where gray clay naturally clung to boots. The abandoned maintenance tunnels beneath the western cliff. The same tunnels officially sealed years ago. No servant, no guard, no royal advisor had any reason to be there. Nathan calmly thanked one of the officers before glancing toward the corridor leading outside. Only for a moment. Then he looked away. Emily quietly followed his gaze. The corridor led directly toward the grand balcony, toward the place where Alpha King Alexander would stand before the entire kingdom within the hour. She looked once more at the black thread resting in her palm, then at the dried gray clay. Separately, neither meant anything. Together, they formed a question she couldn't ignore. Why had the king's most trusted beta been inside a place no one should have entered? Around her, servants continued preparing for the ceremony with cheerful confidence. Laughter drifted through the chamber. Armor buckles clicked into place. The royal herald rehearsed the king's introduction somewhere beyond the hallway. Only Emily felt the quiet weight settling inside her chest. It wasn't fear. Not yet. It was the unmistakable feeling that two ordinary details had just whispered the beginning of something terribly wrong. The most dangerous betrayals are never announced. They are hidden behind the faces you trust every single day. Emily Carter slipped the coarse black thread into the small pocket sewn inside her apron. She kept her expression calm. No servant survived long inside Blackstone Castle by staring too long at nobles. Questions were dangerous. Silence was expected. Around her, preparations for the royal ceremony continued without interruption. Musicians rehearsed beyond the Eastern Hall. Kitchen servants hurried toward the banquet rooms carrying trays of fresh bread and roasted pheasant. Royal guards polished breastplates until every piece reflected the morning sun. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary. Only Emily felt that something no longer fit. She quietly returned the ceremonial cloak to its stand. As she stepped backward, two senior maids approached. "Emily," one of them smiled. "The king will need his cloak fastened in the audience chamber." Emily nodded politely. "I'll bring it." Neither woman noticed the black thread now hidden inside Emily's apron. Nor did they notice her eyes drifting once more toward Beta Nathan Cole. He was speaking with Captain Adrian Wells, commander of the balcony guard. Nathan pointed casually toward the eastern entrance, then toward the grand balcony. Captain Adrian nodded before walking away to inspect his men. Nathan remained perfectly composed. Too composed. Emily remembered another lesson her father often repeated while repairing old stone passages. When someone already knows where everyone should stand, ask who decided the positions. She quietly left the dressing chamber carrying the royal cloak over both arms. The audience chamber stood at the center of the castle, connected by 3 long corridors. Most servants used the western hallway. Emily chose the eastern passage instead. As she walked, she slowed near a narrow window overlooking the outer courtyard. Below, stable hands prepared the king's favorite white stallion. Everything seemed normal, until she noticed something else. A heavy supply wagon stood beside the eastern gate. Its rear wheels were covered with fresh gray clay, the exact same clay she had seen beneath Nathan's boot. Emily frowned. The wagon carried sealed wooden crates marked as festival decorations. Yet no workers unloaded them. Instead, 2 unfamiliar laborers remained beside the wagon, watching the castle entrance far more often than the cargo. One briefly touched the side of his neck. A signal. Moments later, Nathan appeared below in the courtyard. He never approached the wagon. He simply adjusted one glove while walking past. One laborer answered by scratching his left sleeve. Another signal. Emily felt her pulse quicken. None of it proved anything, but none of it felt accidental. She continued toward the audience chamber. Inside, Alpha King Alexander Hayes stood before a tall mirror while attendants secured the final pieces of ceremonial armor. His expression remained calm despite the importance of the day. Several advisors discussed the order of speeches. Military commanders reviewed security positions. Nathan entered only seconds later. "Everything is ready, Your Majesty." Alexander nodded. "The balcony?" "Completely secured." Nathan answered without hesitation. Emily quietly lowered her eyes. "Completely secured." Then why had he come from the sealed tunnels? Why did the same gray clay appear on the wagon outside? Why exchange silent gestures with strangers? She approached the king carrying the heavy midnight blue cloak. The attendants stepped aside automatically. This part of the ceremony always belonged to the maid assigned to the royal wardrobe. Emily lifted the cloak onto Alexander's shoulders. The fabric settled perfectly across his armor. She reached toward the silver clasp beneath his collar. As her fingers adjusted the edge of the cloak, she noticed something else. A faint smell. Not perfume. Not leather. Oil. Fresh machine oil. Very similar to the lubricant castle builders once used on hidden stone mechanisms beneath the old western tunnels. It clung lightly to Nathan's gloves as he stood only a few feet away. Emily's heartbeat became impossibly steady. The black thread, the gray clay, the hidden signals, the strange oil. Each clue was still small. Each clue could still be dismissed. But together, they painted the outline of a trap that was rapidly closing around the only man in the kingdom who had no reason to suspect the person standing closest beside him. Emily fastened the final clasp beneath the king's neck. For one brief moment, Alexander looked directly at her. His calm blue eyes waited, perhaps only for a servant's quiet confirmation that everything was ready. Instead, Emily realized she carried a warning that could cost her position, or save his life. Emily's fingers remained on the silver clasp for only a heartbeat longer than they should have. Then she stepped back. Every instinct told her to speak. Every lesson life had taught her warned her not to. Inside Blackstone Castle, servants were invisible until they made a mistake, and mistakes were rarely forgiven. Alpha King Alexander turned away from the mirror as one of the royal advisors presented the order of the morning ceremony. Military captains gathered around a large oak table where a map of the castle grounds lay unrolled. Colored markers identified every patrol, every gate, and every guard assigned to protect the king during his appearance on the grand balcony. Nathan Cole stood at the center of them all. Confident, calm, respected. Emily watched him point toward the eastern corridor. The balcony guard rotates 5 minutes before His Majesty steps outside, Nathan said smoothly. No interruptions. No unnecessary movement. Several captains nodded in agreement. No one questioned him. Why would they? For nearly 15 years, Nathan had stood beside the Alpha King through wars, treaties, and rebellions. He was more than an advisor. He was family. Emily lowered her eyes and quietly carried an empty garment stand toward the exit. Perhaps she had misunderstood everything. Perhaps the gray clay came from repair work. Perhaps the black thread meant nothing. Perhaps the strange signals in the courtyard were ordinary gestures between workers. She wanted to believe that. She truly did. But as she entered the corridor outside the audience chamber, another detail stopped her cold. A royal guard hurried toward Nathan carrying a sealed leather case. "My Lord Beta," the guard said. "The inspection report you requested." Nathan accepted the case with a pleasant smile. "Thank you." The guard bowed and continued down the hallway. Nathan waited until the man disappeared around the corner. Then, believing no one was watching, he quietly slipped the unopened leather case beneath a decorative table instead of taking it with him. He never even broke the wax seal. Emily frowned. If the report mattered enough to request personally, why ignore it? Seconds later, another servant accidentally bumped into the table while carrying folded banners. The leather case shifted. Its flap opened slightly. A narrow piece of parchment slid halfway out. Emily caught only one line before Nathan calmly stepped forward and closed it again. West Passage, cleared. Her heartbeat quickened. The West Passage. Not the Western Corridor. The West Passage. That was the old builder's name. The hidden tunnel beneath the western cliff. Almost no one still called it that, except the men who had built it, or those who had recently used it. Nathan noticed Emily standing nearby. For the first time that morning, their eyes met. His smile remained polite, yet something behind it felt strangely empty. "You." Emily immediately lowered her head. "Yes, my lord. Why are you still here?" "I was returning the garment stand." Nathan glanced at it briefly, then at her face. His expression softened into effortless courtesy. "You work too hard." The words sounded kind. His eyes did not. Emily murmured, "Thank you, my lord. Enjoy the celebration." He walked away before she answered. Only after his footsteps disappeared did Emily realize her palms had become damp. She wasn't frightened because he had spoken to her. She was frightened because it felt as though he had measured whether she had seen too much. Across the hallway, the great bronze clock struck the quarter hour. Only 30 minutes remained before the Alpha King would walk onto the grand balcony. Emily looked toward the tall windows overlooking the castle square. Thousands of pack members were already gathering below. Children sat on their fathers' shoulders. Merchants waved banners embroidered with the white wolf crest. Everyone had come to celebrate peace. No one knew danger was already inside the castle walls. Emily closed her eyes for a single breath. If she stayed silent, and she was wrong, nothing would happen. If she spoke, and she was wrong, she would lose everything. But if she stayed silent, and she was right, an Alpha King might step through those doors only to walk directly into a trap prepared by the one man he trusted most. When Emily opened her eyes again, uncertainty had disappeared. She no longer cared whether anyone believed a Maid. She cared only that Alexander Hayes remained alive long enough to find out the truth. Somehow, before the balcony doors opened, she had to warn him. Emily slipped away before the guards could stop her again. The corridor leading to the grand balcony had already begun to fill with nobles, advisors, officers, and ceremonial attendants. Every step echoed with anticipation. Outside, thousands of voices merged into a distant roar as the people waited for their Alpha King to appear. She had only minutes left. At the far end of the hallway, Alexander Hayes stood alone for the first time that morning. His advisors had moved ahead to organize the procession. Nathan Cole was speaking with Captain Adrian near the balcony doors. For a brief moment, the king had no one beside him. Emily knew this was her only chance. She walked forward with her head lowered, carrying a folded linen cloth to avoid drawing attention. When she reached the king, she bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty." Alexander turned toward her immediately. He recognized the young maid who had fastened his cloak only moments earlier. "Is something wrong?" His calm voice almost made her lose her courage. Everything inside the castle insisted she should remain silent. But the image of the gray clay, the hidden tunnel, the strange signals, would not leave her mind. Emily lifted the linen cloth as though she were simply brushing dust from the king's shoulder. Her hands reached the edge of his midnight blue cloak. She carefully straightened the heavy fabric near his collar. To everyone watching, she appeared to be correcting a servant's final mistake. Only Alexander heard the words she whispered. "Your beta is waiting outside." Her fingers paused for the briefest instant. "Please don't step out." Alexander's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "What did you say?" Emily kept adjusting the cloak without looking at him. "I may be wrong." Her voice remained barely audible. "But if I'm right, don't leave through the balcony." The king studied her face. There was no panic, no hysteria, only quiet certainty. Before he could respond, Nathan's voice echoed from the doorway. "Your Majesty." Nathan approached with his usual confident smile. "The people are waiting." Emily immediately stepped back. Nathan glanced briefly toward her. "What is the maid doing?" Alexander answered before Emily could speak. "Adjusting my cloak." Nathan smiled politely. "Then we should not keep the kingdom waiting." Emily lowered her head and retreated several steps. Every instinct screamed that she had failed. Alexander resumed walking toward the balcony entrance. Nathan walked beside him. Captain Adrian ordered the guards into formation. The enormous wooden doors slowly began to open. Sunlight flooded the corridor. Cheers from thousands of citizens rolled into the castle like crashing waves. Emily stood frozen. She had spoken. The choice was no longer hers. Alexander reached the threshold. One more step, then another. Just before crossing onto the balcony, he stopped. Without warning, he looked down at the silver clasp beneath his cloak. Emily's hands had fastened it only minutes earlier. Slowly, almost casually, he reached up and adjusted the cloak exactly where she had touched it. Then he turned his head slightly. "Nathan." "Yes, Your Majesty." "I've changed my mind." Nathan blinked. "The procession? We'll use the Western Council chamber first." A flicker, so brief that almost no one noticed, crossed Nathan's face. Not confusion, disappointment. The expression vanished almost instantly. "Of course," Nathan replied smoothly. "As you wish." Alexander did not move toward the balcony. Instead, he stepped backward into the castle. The cheering outside continued, unaware that the king had not yet appeared. Emily felt her heartbeat pounding inside her chest. Had he believed her? Or was he simply delaying the ceremony? She never found out, because only seconds later, a deafening explosion shattered the morning. The entire eastern balcony erupted in splintering wood, flying stone, and collapsing iron railings. Glass exploded outward. Smoke filled the air. Screams echoed across the castle square. The place where Alpha King Alexander Hayes should have been standing vanished beneath a cloud of dust and falling debris. Silence gripped everyone inside the corridor. Captain Adrian stared at the destruction in disbelief. The guards froze. The nobles turned pale. And Alexander slowly lifted his eyes toward Emily. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Within a matter of seconds, every person in that hallway realized the impossible. The maid no one had believed had just saved the Alpha King's life. The truth has a strange way of revealing itself, sometimes through a confession, sometimes through evidence, and sometimes through the expression on the face of the guilty when their perfect plan suddenly fails. The thunderous explosion echoed across Blackstone Castle long after the balcony collapsed. Dust poured through the shattered doorway. Fragments of carved stone crashed into the courtyard below. Thousands of frightened voices erupted outside as soldiers rushed to evacuate the crowd. Inside the eastern corridor, no one moved. Captain Adrian Wells stared at the smoking ruins. His face had lost every trace of confidence. Only moments earlier, he had dismissed Emily as an anxious servant. Now the place where his king should have been standing no longer existed. Slowly, almost mechanically, he turned toward her. Emily remained exactly where she had stepped back after adjusting the king's cloak. Her hands trembled. Not from fear. From relief. Alexander Hayes was alive. That alone mattered. Nathan Cole recovered first. What happened? His voice carried perfect concern. Perfect surprise. Too perfect. He immediately moved toward the damaged balcony. We must secure His Majesty. Alexander raised one hand. Stay where you are. Nathan stopped. Only for an instant. Then he smiled politely. Your Majesty? Alexander never looked away from him. Nobody enters that balcony. Captain Adrian finally regained his senses. You heard the king. Royal guards quickly sealed the corridor. No one crossed the broken doorway. Smoke continued drifting through the shattered arches. Several engineers hurried forward carrying lanterns. One carefully examined the fractured stone beneath the collapsed railing. His expression changed almost immediately. My king. Alexander walked only close enough to hear him. What is it? The engineer knelt beside a cracked support beam. This wasn't an accident. He brushed away loose dust with a leather glove. Hidden beneath the broken stone rested several iron wedges driven deep into the supporting columns. Fresh hammer marks surrounded them. The engineer looked up. Someone deliberately weakened the balcony. Silence returned. This time, no one laughed. Captain Adrian slowly lowered his head. He remembered every word Emily had spoken. Gray clay. Hidden tunnels. Strange signals. He had ignored all of it. Nathan folded his arms thoughtfully. Who could have done such a thing? His question sounded reasonable. Alexander answered calmly. That's exactly what we're going to discover. Nathan nodded. I'll organize a search immediately. No. The single word stopped everyone. Alexander finally stepped closer. I want every gate closed. Nobody leaves the castle. Nathan hesitated. But Your Majesty, if the attackers escaped during the explosion, they didn't. Alexander interrupted quietly. They're still here. The king's eyes remained fixed on Nathan just long enough for Emily to notice something almost invisible. Nathan's breathing changed. Only slightly. Only for a heartbeat. Then it returned to normal. Alexander turned toward Captain Adrian. Seal every corridor leading to the western tunnels. Adrian looked startled. The western tunnels? Alexander glanced briefly toward Emily. Our maid believes someone has been using them. The captain followed the king's gaze. For the first time that day, he bowed respectfully to Emily. My lady. His voice carried genuine regret. I should have listened. Emily gently shook her head. We don't know everything yet. No, Alexander replied. But we know enough. He removed the silver clasp from his cloak and held it in his hand. The warning came before the explosion. He looked toward Emily. You didn't accuse anyone. You asked me not to step outside. Emily nodded. I wasn't certain. What made you speak? She slowly opened her hand. Resting in her palm lay the coarse black thread she had found that morning. Beside it, tiny flakes of dried gray clay still clung to the fabric of her apron. They weren't proof. She said quietly. They were questions. Alexander studied the thread for several silent moments. Then he closed her fingers gently around it. No, he said. They were the beginning of the truth. Outside, alarm bells rang throughout Blackstone Castle as every gate slammed shut. Inside the ruined corridor, the Alpha King no longer saw Emily Carter as an invisible maid. He saw the only person who had noticed what everyone else, including his most trusted advisors, had completely overlooked. And somewhere beyond the silent stone walls of the western tunnels, the people responsible for the failed assassination had just realized something they never expected. Their greatest obstacle was not an army. It was a maid who refused to ignore the smallest detail. The guilty rarely run first. They wait to see whether their lie is still believed. The castle gates thundered shut one after another. Iron chains tightened. Massive wooden doors locked into place. No one would enter. No one would leave. From every tower, signal horns echoed across Blackstone Castle, ordering soldiers to secure every corridor, courtyard, and underground passage. The celebration had ended. The hunt had begun. Inside the damaged eastern wing, engineers continued examining the shattered balcony, while Captain Adrian directed dozens of guards through the castle. Every servant was questioned. Every wagon searched. Every entrance sealed. Yet one man appeared perfectly calm. Beta Nathan Cole. He moved through the corridors with practiced confidence, issuing clear instructions to frightened officers. Search the outer walls. Double the northern patrol. Inspect every servant's quarters. His commands sounded reasonable, helpful. Responsible. If Emily had not watched him all morning, she might have believed he was trying to protect the king. Instead, she noticed something different. Nathan never once suggested searching the western tunnels. Not once. Alexander noticed it too. The Alpha King stood beside one of the shattered windows overlooking the crowded courtyard below. Without turning around, he spoke quietly. Captain Adrian. My king. Who assigned today's balcony guards? Adrian answered immediately. Beta Nathan approved the final roster. Alexander remained silent. And who approved the supply wagon entering through the eastern gate? Adrian hesitated. Nathan did. Emily lowered her eyes. The room suddenly felt colder. Alexander slowly turned toward Nathan. My beta. Nathan bowed respectfully. Your Majesty, I want the original guard roster. Nathan answered without hesitation. It was damaged during the explosion. Captain Adrian frowned. It shouldn't have been. Nathan smiled politely. I must have been mistaken. Emily noticed it again. A mistake. Small. Almost invisible. Nathan never made mistakes. Not with records. Not with schedules. Not with names. Alexander seemed to notice the same thing. Then we'll retrieve another copy. Nathan nodded. Of course. Before anyone moved, a young messenger burst into the corridor, breathing heavily. My king. Everyone turned. The Eastern supply wagon. What about it? It disappeared. Captain Adrian stared. Impossible. The gates closed only moments after the explosion. The messenger swallowed. We found the wagon abandoned behind the old granary. And the workers? Gone. Silence spread through the corridor. Nathan folded his arms. They probably panicked. Emily quietly spoke for the first time. They didn't panic. Every eye turned toward her. They left because they already knew where to go. Nathan smiled faintly. Interesting conclusion. Emily looked directly at him. It wasn't a festival wagon. It never unloaded its crates. It only waited. Nathan tilted his head slightly. You seem very observant. Alexander interrupted before Nathan could continue. Captain. Yes, Your Majesty. Take 10 trusted soldiers. Search the abandoned western tunnels. Nathan spoke almost immediately. My king, with respect, those tunnels collapsed years ago. Alexander's eyes met his. Then you shouldn't object to proving they're empty. For the first time all morning. Nathan did not answer immediately. Only a single heartbeat passed. But Emily saw it. A slight tightening of his jaw. A brief flicker behind his eyes. Fear. It disappeared as quickly as it came. Nathan lowered his head. As you command. Captain Adrian selected his soldiers personally. None came from Nathan's recommendations. As the search party disappeared toward the western courtyard, Alexander remained beside Emily. You noticed that? She nodded. He wanted everyone searching everywhere. Except one place. Alexander looked toward the sealed corridor leading beneath the castle. My father once told me, Emily said quietly. People protect what they fear losing. Alexander finished her thought. And today? Nathan fears those tunnels more than the explosion itself. Far beneath Blackstone Castle, hidden beyond ancient stone walls no one was supposed to remember. Someone heard the alarm bells ringing above. Footsteps hurried through the darkness. Secret doors opened. Locked chests were dragged across damp stone floors. Whoever had planned the Alpha King's death had finally realized their greatest advantage, remaining unseen, was slipping away. Because one maid had noticed a black thread and refused to look away. The oldest secrets are never buried. They are simply hidden beneath places everyone has forgotten to search. Torches flickered against damp stone walls as Captain Adrian led 10 carefully chosen guards into the abandoned western tunnels. The narrow passage smelled of moisture, rust, and old earth. Centuries earlier, these tunnels had served as emergency escape routes beneath Blackstone Castle. Official records claimed they had collapsed decades ago. Official records had lied. The first barricade appeared less than 50 yards underground. Large stones had been arranged to resemble a cave-in. One soldier examined the rocks before looking back at Adrian. My captain, these weren't here long. He pushed against one of the boulders. It shifted far too easily. Within minutes, the guards dismantled the false collapse. Behind it, a perfectly preserved tunnel stretched deeper beneath the castle. Fresh boot prints covered the muddy floor. They've been using this recently, Adrian whispered. The search party advanced cautiously. Every torch revealed more evidence. Wooden crates, barrels of lamp oil, bundles of heavy rope. fresh food supplies. None of it belonged inside abandoned ruins. One soldier suddenly raised his fist. Stop! The men froze. Ahead, faint voices echoed through the darkness. Someone was still inside. Back in the castle above, Alexander stood inside the royal war chamber, studying old architectural maps spread across a massive oak table. Emily quietly remained near the doorway. She had no official place among generals and advisors. Yet no one asked her to leave. Alexander traced one faded corridor with his finger. The western tunnels connect here. He stopped. Beneath the eastern balcony. Captain Adrian's earlier report suddenly made perfect sense. If explosives had been planted below the supporting columns, no one above would have noticed. Emily stepped closer. There. She pointed toward another faded passage. Alexander followed her finger. What is this room? One elderly archivist adjusted his spectacles. The old royal armory. It was sealed after the Civil War. Emily looked at the map thoughtfully. If someone wanted to hide weapons, they wouldn't choose a place nobody could reach. She looked up. They would choose a place everyone believed was already empty. Alexander slowly nodded. Before he could answer, the chamber doors burst open. A messenger hurried inside. My king. Alexander looked up immediately. Report. Captain Adrian found the tunnels. Every officer stood. And they weren't abandoned. The messenger struggled to catch his breath. There are hidden supply caches, weapons, and signs that dozens of people have been living beneath the castle. The room fell silent. Nathan Cole remained perfectly composed. Then we should eliminate them immediately. Alexander glanced toward him. No. Nathan blinked. My king, if we attack now, the leaders will escape. Nathan answered calmly. Then what do you suggest? Alexander folded the map. We let them believe they're still hidden. Nathan lowered his head. As you wish. Emily watched him carefully. Again, no surprise, no anger, only careful calculation, almost as though he had already begun changing another plan. Several moments later, another messenger entered. This one looked far more shaken. My king, what now? We captured one man. Captain Adrian's patrol had cornered a lookout attempting to flee through the tunnels. He refuses to speak. Alexander nodded once. Bring him alive. The messenger hesitated. He asked for something. What? He said. The young soldier swallowed nervously. He'll only speak to the maid. Every face in the chamber turned toward Emily. Nathan's expression remained controlled. But for the briefest moment, his eyes darkened. Alexander noticed it. So, the king said quietly, our enemies know exactly who she is. Emily felt a chill travel through her body. She had believed she was merely an unnoticed servant who happened to see details others ignored. Now she understood something far more dangerous. The conspiracy beneath Blackstone Castle had already begun watching her. Long before she realized, they had started fearing her. Fear changes people. It makes the innocent tremble, and it makes the guilty rush. The prisoner sat alone inside a small stone chamber beneath Blackstone Castle. His wrists were chained to an iron ring embedded in the wall. A single lantern cast long shadows across the floor. Captain Adrian stood outside the heavy oak door with 4 trusted guards. No one entered without the Alpha King's permission. Alexander Hayes arrived first. Emily followed several steps behind. Nathan Cole walked with the royal advisors as though this interrogation were simply another duty of state. The king's eyes moved toward the prisoner. The man could not have been older than 30. Mud still covered his boots. Fresh scratches marked his hands. He looked exhausted, terrified. Yet when his gaze finally settled on Emily, relief replaced fear. There, he whispered. She's the one. Captain Adrian frowned. You know her? The prisoner slowly nodded. Alexander stepped forward. You asked to speak only to the maid. Why? The man swallowed hard. Because she sees things. Nathan gave a quiet, dismissive laugh. That hardly explains anything. The prisoner ignored him. Instead, he continued staring at Emily. We were warned about her. Emily's expression changed. Warned? The prisoner nodded again. They said, if a servant named Emily Carter ever started asking questions, the operation would fail. The room became completely silent. Captain Adrian looked sharply toward Nathan before forcing himself to look away. Alexander remained motionless. Who warned you? The prisoner closed his eyes. I don't know his name. What did he look like? He never removed his hood. Nathan crossed his arms calmly. This man is clearly inventing stories to save himself. The prisoner suddenly laughed. Not loudly, not confidently, almost sadly. You still don't understand. Nathan's eyes narrowed. Understand what? The prisoner's voice became steady. This was never about killing the king. Every person in the room froze. Alexander spoke quietly. Explain. The explosion was only the beginning. Emily felt a chill crawl through her chest. What do you mean? The prisoner looked directly at Alexander. If you had died, every noble house would have blamed the neighboring packs. A war would have started within days. Captain Adrian slowly lowered his head. The realization struck him all at once. The assassination had never been the true objective. It had been the spark. Alexander asked one final question. Who planned it? The prisoner looked toward Nathan. Only for a fraction of a second. Barely noticeable. But Emily saw it. Nathan saw it too. Before anyone could react, the prisoner suddenly jerked forward violently. Blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. Captain Adrian rushed inside. Hold him. The guards caught him before he collapsed. Emily immediately knelt beside the prisoner. His breathing became shallow. She gently opened his mouth. Her eyes widened. A capsule. Captain Adrian looked confused. What? He bit something. Alexander stepped closer. Poison. Emily nodded slowly. It was hidden inside one of his back teeth. The prisoner's heartbeat weakened rapidly. He struggled to speak. Emily leaned closer. You don't have to protect them anymore. His fading eyes met hers. With the last strength he possessed, he whispered only 3 words. Trust no beta. His body went still. Silence consumed the chamber. Captain Adrian closed the prisoner's eyes. Nathan quietly exhaled. A tragic end. Emily slowly stood. Her hands trembled again. Not from death. From certainty. The dying man's final warning matched every detail she had uncovered since dawn. Gray clay. Hidden tunnels. The supply wagon. The destroyed balcony. Everything pointed in one direction. She slowly turned toward Alexander. Before she could speak, the king already understood. His gaze moved past her. It settled directly upon Nathan Cole. Neither man spoke. Neither accused the other. But for the first time in 15 years, the Alpha King looked at his most trusted beta, not as a brother, not as a protector, but as a man who might be hiding behind the greatest betrayal Blackstone Castle had ever known. And Nathan, despite the calm expression he fought to maintain, finally realized something he had never imagined possible. Emily Carter was no longer just a servant who had survived. She had become the single witness capable of unraveling everything he had spent years building. The most dangerous enemy is the one who realizes you've begun to suspect him. The prisoner's final words lingered in the silence long after his body had been carried away. Trust no beta. Captain Adrian dismissed the guards and sealed the underground chamber. Only 4 people remained. Alexander, Emily, Captain Adrian, Nathan Cole. The air itself seemed heavier. Alexander looked down at the rough wooden table where the prisoner's possessions had been placed. A rusted knife, several silver coins, a torn map, and a narrow strip of black cloth. Emily immediately recognized it. The thread. Captain Adrian looked surprised. You've seen this before? Emily nodded. I found one exactly like it near the hidden tunnel entrance. She picked up the cloth carefully. The fabric was unlike anything used by castle servants. It was woven tightly, almost like military uniform lining. Nathan glanced at it only briefly. It could belong to anyone. Emily quietly disagreed. No. She turned the cloth over. Look at the stitching. Captain Adrian leaned closer. Hidden beneath the fold was a tiny embroidered crest. Not a royal emblem. Not a merchant's mark. 3 small wolves arranged in a circle. Alexander frowned. I've seen that symbol before. Nathan answered immediately. An old mercenary company. Alexander slowly shook his head. No. My father burned their banners years ago. Emily remained silent. She wasn't studying the symbol. She was watching Nathan. Every time the conversation moved closer to the truth, he answered too quickly, almost as though he had prepared every explanation long before anyone asked. Alexander noticed it as well. My beta. Nathan met his eyes. Yes, Your Majesty. You remember an organization destroyed 20 years ago. Nathan smiled faintly. I've always valued history. Before Alexander could respond, another officer hurried into the chamber. My king. What is it? We searched the abandoned armory beneath the western tunnels. And we found ledgers. Captain Adrian accepted the weathered books and placed them on the table. Dust covered every page. Alexander opened the first ledger. Most entries listed shipments of grain, iron, and construction supplies. Nothing unusual. Then Emily noticed something. These dates. Alexander looked closer. Every shipment recorded over the past 6 months had been approved by the same official seal. Nathan's seal. Captain Adrian stared at the pages. My king. Nathan answered calmly before anyone accused him. As royal beta, I authorized nearly every supply request. That proves nothing. Alexander nodded once. Not yet. Emily carefully turned another page. The handwriting suddenly changed. The final entries were written by someone else. Short. Precise. Only numbers. No descriptions. She looked thoughtful. These aren't inventory records. Captain Adrian frowned. What are they? Emily traced one column with her finger. Guard rotations. Alexander immediately understood. Each number matched the exact hours when patrols changed throughout the castle. Someone had been recording security movements. For months, Nathan spoke with perfect composure. Anyone could have copied those schedules. Emily looked directly at him. Not anyone. The original rotations were only available inside the Royal Command Office. Silence returned. Captain Adrian slowly turned toward Nathan. Only the king, the captain, and the royal beta had unrestricted access to those records. Nathan remained calm. If you're suggesting I betrayed the crown, bring proof. Alexander closed the ledger quietly. I intend to. Nathan bowed respectfully. Then I'll assist however I can. He left the chamber with the same measured confidence he had carried all day. The heavy door closed behind him. Only after his footsteps disappeared did Captain Adrian finally speak. My king, I no longer trust him. Alexander remained staring at the closed door. Neither do I. Emily lowered her voice. He knows we're getting closer. Alexander looked at her. And people who fear exposure become unpredictable. The Alpha King slowly folded the ledger. From this moment forward, everything we do will appear exactly as Nathan expects. Captain Adrian looked confused. You mean we'll continue pretending to trust him? Alexander nodded. If Nathan truly stands behind this conspiracy, he'll make one mistake. Emily understood immediately. He'll try to destroy the evidence before we find it. Alexander's eyes hardened. And when he does, we'll finally catch him. Far beyond the castle walls, beneath the cover of approaching night, a lone rider disappeared into the forest carrying a single message. The Alpha King had survived. The tunnels had been discovered, and the maid who was supposed to remain invisible had become the greatest threat to the conspiracy's future. A man who believes he is still trusted will always reveal more than a man who knows he is trapped. Night settled over Blackstone Castle. Rain drifted softly against the stained glass windows, washing away the dust left by the failed explosion. Inside the royal council chamber, only 3 candles remained lit. Alexander Hayes, Captain Adrian Wells, and Emily Carter stood around the ancient oak table. No guards, no advisors, no servants, only those the Alpha King still trusted. Alexander unfolded another weathered map recovered from the western tunnels. This wasn't hidden with the weapons. Captain Adrian nodded. It was locked inside a separate iron chest. Emily leaned closer. The parchment did not show military routes. Instead, it marked dozens of small circles throughout the castle. Kitchen, armory, stable, chapel, guest quarters. Every important location had been carefully labeled. What are these? Adrian asked. Emily studied the faded ink. They aren't places. They're people. The room fell silent. Alexander looked toward her. Explain. She pointed to tiny symbols written beside each circle. Different marks. Each one repeats exactly 3 times. They're not rooms being counted. They're positions. Captain Adrian slowly understood. Sleeping assignments. Emily nodded. Someone has been tracking where specific people stay. Alexander's expression hardened. The royal family. The commanders. The guards. And every servant working near them. A long silence followed. This conspiracy had not begun weeks ago. It had been growing quietly for years. Suddenly, 3 gentle knocks echoed against the chamber door. Captain Adrian opened it cautiously. Nathan Cole stood outside carrying several sealed reports. My king, I thought you might wish to review today's security findings. Alexander welcomed him inside with the same calm expression he had worn all evening. "Thank you." Nathan placed the reports on the table. "Our patrols found nothing beyond the abandoned tunnels." Emily noticed something immediately. Nathan never looked toward the recovered map. Not once. As though he already knew what it contained. Alexander casually folded the parchment before Nathan could see it. "We've made little progress." Nathan offered a reassuring smile. "Sometimes patience reveals more than force." Alexander nodded. "I agree." For several moments they discussed ordinary security matters. Guard schedules, supply inventories, repairs to the damaged balcony. Nothing unusual, nothing suspicious. Nathan appeared completely relaxed. Exactly as Alexander intended. Finally Nathan excused himself. "I'll return at sunrise." After the chamber door closed, Captain Adrian released a slow breath. "He believed us." Alexander shook his head. "No. He believed what we wanted him to believe." Emily walked toward the window overlooking the dark courtyard. Rain had erased nearly every footprint from the stone paths below. Nearly. One set remained. Fresh. Leading toward the abandoned chapel. She frowned. "My king." Alexander joined her. "What is it?" "The rain started over an hour ago." He followed her gaze. Yet one narrow trail remained visible beneath the torchlight. Someone had crossed the courtyard only minutes earlier. Toward the chapel. Captain Adrian reached for his sword. "I'll send soldiers." Emily quietly stopped him. "If we send guards, whoever is there will disappear." Alexander looked thoughtfully toward the distant chapel tower. "Then only 3 people go." Captain Adrian nodded. "The 3 of us. No banners. No armor. No escorts. Only cloaks dark enough to disappear into the storm." Several minutes later, they slipped silently through a forgotten side passage and entered the rain-covered courtyard. Lightning flashed overhead. For a single heartbeat, the abandoned chapel appeared against the night like a forgotten monument. Its broken windows glowed faintly from within. Someone had lit a lantern inside. Captain Adrian whispered, "That place has been empty for 15 years." Emily never took her eyes from the broken doorway. "No," she answered softly. "It only wanted everyone to believe it was." Far inside the ruined chapel, hidden beneath cracked stone arches, a hooded figure slowly unfolded a parchment bearing the same emblem embroidered on the black cloth. 3 wolves. 1 circle. And beneath the symbol, 1 newly written sentence. "The maid is no longer unnoticed. Eliminate her before the king learns everything." The truth does not always reveal itself through evidence. Sometimes it reveals itself through the choice an innocent person makes when no one orders them to be brave. The rain intensified as Alexander, Emily, and Captain Adrian crossed the deserted courtyard. Their dark cloaks blended into the shadows surrounding the abandoned chapel. No torches burned outside. No guards stood watch. The ruined building had been ignored for years after a lightning strike damaged its roof. That was exactly why it made the perfect hiding place. Captain Adrian quietly pushed against the heavy wooden door. It opened without resistance. Someone had recently repaired its hinges. Inside, broken pews lay scattered beneath cracked stone arches. Rainwater dripped through gaps in the ceiling, echoing softly across the empty sanctuary. Alexander raised one hand. No one spoke. Emily slowly stepped farther inside. Her eyes moved across the room exactly as they had inside the dressing chamber that morning. She wasn't searching for obvious clues. She searched for details. Fresh footprints interrupted the thick layer of dust near the altar. A lantern still burned behind one of the stone columns. Someone had left only moments earlier. Captain Adrian whispered, "We're too late." Emily gently shook her head. "No." She pointed toward the floor. "The footprints are different." Alexander knelt beside them. One trail led toward the rear exit. Another disappeared behind the old altar. Emily approached carefully. The altar itself appeared solid, carved from a single block of gray stone. Yet something caught her attention. The candles resting on top had no wax beneath them. "They've been moved." Captain Adrian frowned. "What?" "The candles." She lifted one carefully. The stone beneath it was clean. Unlike everything else inside the abandoned chapel, someone had been removing and replacing them repeatedly. Emily examined the carved wolf emblem at the center of the altar. Then she smiled faintly. "My father used this mechanism." Alexander looked at her. "You've seen it before?" "When I was little." She pressed one candle holder down while turning another to the left. A deep, grinding sound echoed beneath the floor. The entire altar shifted several inches. Captain Adrian stared in disbelief. A narrow staircase appeared beneath the stone. Cold air rose from the darkness below. Alexander drew his sword. They were meeting underneath us. The three descended carefully. The hidden chamber below was far larger than anyone expected. Shelves lined the walls. Maps covered long wooden tables. Stacks of coded letters filled open crates. Dozens of royal seals lay arranged beside melted wax. Someone had built an entire command center beneath the abandoned chapel. Emily slowly picked up one document. It listed names. Servants, guards, merchants, couriers. Every person secretly working for the conspiracy. Captain Adrian suddenly stopped. "My king." Alexander walked toward him. Pinned against the far wall hung an enormous map connecting Blackstone Castle with neighboring Alpha territories. Colored strings stretched between dozens of noble houses. "This isn't only our kingdom," Alexander whispered. "It's an entire network." Emily continued reading another ledger. Most names meant nothing to her. Then, she froze. At the bottom of one page appeared a familiar signature. Daniel Carter. Her father's name. Captain Adrian looked over her shoulder. He was listed as an engineer. Emily slowly shook her head. No. She remembered the stories her father had told before he died. The accusations. The disgrace. The sudden dismissal from royal service. He wasn't helping them. Her voice trembled. He was investigating them. Alexander accepted the ledger. Several pages later, another notation appeared. Engineer Daniel Carter. Silenced before completion. Silence filled the underground chamber. Emily closed her eyes. For 20 years, she had believed her father died in disgrace. Now she understood the truth. He had died trying to expose the very conspiracy she had accidentally uncovered. Alexander gently placed one hand on her shoulder. He wasn't a traitor. Emily looked at the faded ink one last time. No, she whispered. He was the first person who tried to stop them. Before anyone could say another word. Footsteps echoed above. Several. Heavy. Organized. Captain Adrian immediately extinguished the nearest lantern. The chamber disappeared into darkness. Someone had entered the chapel, and judging by the number of approaching footsteps, they hadn't come searching for old records. They had come to erase every witness still alive. A kingdom is not saved by the strongest sword. It is saved by the one person who refuses to look away. The footsteps above the hidden chamber multiplied. Captain Adrian silently drew his blade. Alexander extinguished the final lantern. Darkness swallowed the underground room. Only faint beams of moonlight slipped through cracks in the chapel floor. Emily held the ledger against her chest. Her father's name, his sacrifice, his innocence. She would not allow those records to disappear. The concealed door slowly shifted. Several hooded figures descended the stone staircase, carrying torches. One voice echoed through the chamber. "Search everything. Leave nothing behind." Alexander whispered, "Wait." The intruders spread through the room, gathering ledgers and maps into large sacks. One man stopped before the wall covered with conspiracy records. He reached for a torch. Emily immediately understood. They're going to burn everything. Alexander gave one sharp nod. Now, Captain Adrian exploded from the darkness first. His sword struck the nearest torch from a man's hand before sweeping another attacker onto the stone floor. Alexander charged beside him. Steel rang against steel throughout the underground chamber. The conspirators had expected an empty hideout. Instead, they found their Alpha King waiting. Emily remained behind the stone shelves, protecting the evidence. One masked attacker broke through the fighting and rushed directly toward her. He wasn't reaching for the ledgers. He was reaching for Emily, the witness. Kill her. Emily stepped backward as the assassin lunged. Before he could strike, Alexander intercepted him. Their swords collided with tremendous force. The attack drove Alexander against one of the stone pillars. The assassin escaped toward the staircase. Captain Adrian pursued him immediately. Outside, thunder rolled across the night sky. Within minutes, the battle ended. Several attackers lay captured. Others had fled into the forest. Captain Adrian returned breathing heavily. They escaped through the northern path. Alexander lowered his sword. It doesn't matter. Emily looked at him. They failed. Captain Adrian carefully gathered every surviving ledger and map. This is enough. It proves everything. As dawn approached, the great hall of Blackstone Castle filled with nobles, commanders, merchants, and pack elders. Alexander ordered the entire court to assemble. Nathan Cole entered with his usual calm confidence. He bowed respectfully. "My king." Alexander remained seated upon the Alpha throne. No warmth remained in his expression. Captain Adrian carried the recovered ledgers before the assembled court. Murmurs spread through the hall. Alexander stood. "For years, someone hidden inside this castle has betrayed the crown." Silence answered him. He continued. "My father's investigations disappeared. My enemies moved beneath our feet. My people were watched. My kingdom was prepared for civil war." Nathan finally spoke. "Your Majesty, surely there is proof before such accusations." Alexander nodded. "There is." Captain Adrian opened the first ledger. Then another. Then another. Every seal. Every payment. Every hidden route. Every coded order. One signature appeared again and again. Nathan Cole. The great hall fell silent. Nathan's face remained composed, but his eyes no longer held confidence. Alexander descended the throne steps slowly. "For 15 years, I trusted you like a brother." Nathan lowered his head. "You trusted too easily." The confession echoed through the chamber. Gasps filled the hall. Guards surrounded Nathan instantly. He never resisted. Instead, he smiled bitterly. "You survived because of a servant." Alexander looked toward Emily. "No," he answered quietly. "I survived because she chose courage when everyone else chose silence." Emily stood uncertainly near the entrance, still wearing the simple maid's uniform she had worn since the beginning. Alexander crossed the hall until he stood before her. Every noble watched. Every servant held their breath. He turned toward the court. "The maid you ignored uncovered the conspiracy my generals never found. The servant you mocked saved your king. She restored the honor stolen from her father. She protected this kingdom before anyone believed her." Alexander removed the royal protection clasp from his own cloak. He fastened it gently upon Emily's shoulders. "From this day forward, no one will speak to Emily Carter as though she is beneath them. She stands under my protection, and she will always have a place at my table." The great hall slowly filled with respectful bows. Not because she had been born noble, not because fate had chosen her, but because a forgotten maid had noticed what everyone else ignored, had dared to speak when everyone demanded silence, and had changed the destiny of an Alpha King and an entire kingdom with nothing more than honesty, courage, and the refusal to step aside when evil expected her to remain invisible.